Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing tonight?
Riding an XFL high.
Yeah, that was a good game. I enjoyed the opening. I didn't get a chance to see the second game tonight, but I did get a chance to watch the first game, and it is increasingly obvious that that Tampa Bay, while halfway decent when things start to go, like when they start to click, are absolutely no match for Houston.
Yeah. Houston is the most exciting team in the league, which means that they're never out of it. They will also, of course, put their opponents back into it. But yeah, when you get the most exciting team in the league versus a team that's like all right when they're on, it ends up being a mismatch by the end.
It felt a bit like I was watching the Cardinals play against Detroit last season, where Detroit was beating up on them, and then the moment that Arizona started to click, and you're like, oh my, this offense actually has something. Like,
yes.
As it turns out, their number one pick might actually be useful.
It's almost exactly like that. Like, they just, I don't know, when PJ Walker's on, it's just like, it's so fun to watch.
Well, I was watching that just lame duck throw he had up in the air, and how that is picked off nearly every single time. But in this case, Tampa Bay didn't have a defender around him for miles. Like, it was just like he was going to be so upset if that didn't get caught, because that had touchdown written all over it. But you just watch that thing wobble up in the air like a Brett Favre lame duck. Like, yep, somebody's going to return that for a pick. So, oh my God, that's a touchdown.
Yeah, no, that was great. Well, especially because like it was kind of his fault that there was no defender there, because the defender abandoned their coverage to defend the run as he was running up in the pocket, and He was like, "Oh, yeah, I could just do this then."
Like, I'm just gonna heave this up in the air, and there's a touchdown. Awesome. Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. We have plenty of stuff to talk about, including Everson Griffen, who has reportedly decided he will not be returning to the Vikings. We also have a lot of talk about the CBA and how this will likely affect football moving forward for the season after this one. And also we have a massive mailbag full of your questions, and we will be ready to pilfer through there and decide, well, quite frankly, there's a question in there that I've been waiting to tell for years. I've been waiting to answer the question on the show for years, so we'll see how that goes. But before we do, just want to thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you once again for supporting Norse Code, whether it be through Patreon, PayPal, whether you just download the show, whether you've told friends about the show, have said nice things to us, or said nice things to other people about us. We appreciate the support from you guys so much. If you are interested in supporting the show financially, you can do so in one of two different ways. You can go to paypal.me/NorseCode and give a one-time donation there. Or you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and send a donation in that way. That's more of a subscription-based monthly, so you end up getting charged monthly to end up getting access to the stuff that we'll be providing up on the Patreon website. Speaking of which, we were discussing potential ways to increase listenership, to increase sponsorship for Patreon users. We had a lot of feedback. If you'd like to send in some feedback for ideas as to what we could do to really make it worth your while to support the show on Patreon, you can email us at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. You can also just send a message on Twitter to the account as well, norsecodedn. You can either DM or just at the account, and I'll take a look at it there. Again, I really have appreciated a lot of the comments that have come in, including a few great ideas that I just need to take a moment to mention, because they really, really stood out, along with custom-made Arif t-shirts and a possible tie-in with Draw Play Dave, which I enjoyed that. You've graced...
I don't love the idea of my face on a shirt, but if it's gonna happen, and it sounds like that's a pretty popular idea, so it's probably gonna happen. If it's gonna happen, I would love to reach out to Drop Play Dave, who, like you were about to say, I've been on his comic number of like 3 times.
At least
I want to
3
say.
times, yes.
Yeah,
and you received the highest honor he can give, which was that you killed yourself on there. So that was important.
That's it's a pretty rare honor. I'm humbled.
Mm-hmm. Also, there's a lot of talk about doing a Discord for the show. That looks like the most likely thing that will end up coming out of all of this. So that will be something that we'll be starting a little later. There was also a suggestion of an episode of Dusty O'Connell painstakingly retelling the entire story of Star Wars, episodes 1 through 9, if Patreon allows that many obscenities. To which Dusty said that he would be willing to live stream it if Arif and I would be willing to go up to Denver for a weekend, and like Malcolm from Clockwork Orange, his eyes open so he could sit and watch them all.
Yeah, that would be phenomenal if we get that happening, and that would be behind the Patreon. I mean, also somebody mentioned, just having like non-football episodes where we talk about things like pop culture, and that would be in that category. I like that idea too. It's probably something that we'll explore, of having, because we talked for a long time about like the Rise of Skywalker for one episode, right? Yes. And we can parse out, that can go into the Patreon content that's not necessarily football related, while you still have all the football stuff that's just kind of out here on the podcast.
Yep, and we can reference the bonus episodes and be like, if you want to hear more about this, you can check out the bonus episodes that are up at patreon.com.
Get you to pay up to understand our references.
Exactly. Speaking of, there was an idea to do not a behind the podcast sort of thing, like behind the music, but just an explanation of the inside jokes that we've been telling for 6 years. So
I like the behind the music though, because it will detail my rise and fall, drug related, of course.
Your Percodan addiction, and what was the name of the? I can't remember what the medicine was that caused Ken Griffey Jr.'s head to just like, it was nerve tonic that caused his head to just get larger and larger in the Simpsons episode. So yeah, it was Krusty the Clown who was addicted to Percodan. It was. Because it's important for me to remember that. And, the details of the CBA, no. For whatever reason, I couldn't remember the drug that Krusty the Clown was both addicted to and later kicked as a thing of The Simpsons. Yeah, go me. But we have a couple of good ideas that we can go off of. So we'll be making more announcements probably in the next 2-3 weeks or so. After Arif gets back from the Combine, which should be interesting and a lot of good content there too. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But before we do, just want to thank our 2 new Patreon subscribers. Just want to thank Rob Paul, apologies, but Rob Paul and Nick Stenerson. Thank you guys so much for contributing to the show, for helping keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, which we will have to explain in a future episode, I suppose. And really helping keep this show ad-free, because that is the goal. We want to keep the show ad-free, and we want to keep this as listener-friendly as we possibly can be. So, again, thank you guys so much. Really do appreciate it. Patreon.com/NorseCode or PayPal.me/NorseCode. Either way will end up helping us out considerably and help us keep ad-free, help us remain ad-free anyway. So, let's move on from the shilling and talk about the biggest news of the last 2 weeks, which involves Everson Griffen no longer being a Minnesota Viking.
Yeah, so Everson Griffen voided his contract, something that his contract allowed him to do if he had hit 6.5 sacks. Players typically put these voids in their contracts so that they can negotiate for a higher salary once they hit a particular performance escalator that would normally be a performance incentive, but this time would allow Everson to negotiate elsewhere. Here, that's clearly not the case. Griffen is not necessarily attempting to get more than like $13 million somewhere or anywhere else, but it does give him the right to kind of contact other teams and evaluate his market value. And he still would be able to come back to the Vikings and they can kind of discuss terms from there. I would not be shocked if he got an $8 million a year offer from somewhere, and I would not be shocked if the Vikings just wouldn't be able to match that. But this is not necessarily the end of Griffen in a Vikings uniform, even for the 2020 season. The Vikings could very well bring him back. It doesn't seem like there's any
animosity, ill will.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And this is just kind of like an accounting / negotiating / business move more than it is anything else. So, it does give the Vikings the opportunity to free up more cap space if the Vikings were forced to cut him and then re-sign him versus, him voiding the contract or something. The Vikings would be liable for an $800,000 dead hit on their cap, and which is not like enormous, but it's something. So it's probably best for both parties because Griffen can talk to other teams right away before the beginning of free agency, before even the unofficial beginning of free agency, which is the NFL Combine, begin to gauge his value and then come back to the Vikings, maybe even sign a deal before or realize that, that's not something he wants to do and sign elsewhere. I think we were all kind of preparing for a 2020 season without Griffen. We've talked about it a couple of times in this podcast. So it's not surprising. It is, I think nice for both parties that it was resolved this way versus maybe another way.
And like you had said, this is something that people had been really planning for. This is, to me, this is one of the two most likely things to happen this entire offseason. The second one being that Xavier Rhodes is released. So it's definitely not a surprise to anyone who's paid attention to either the show or really the Minnesota Vikings this year, because this cap situation that the Vikings are in is hell. And being able to re-sign anyone or extend anyone is going to be incredibly tricky.
Yeah, no, exactly. And there's other potential moves. I think the Rhodes one is the one we all expect to see, but, we could see movement regarding Linval Joseph. We could see movement regarding, probably not Kyle Rudolph, but I mean, it's on the table. We could see movement, with a couple of different players. And I think Griffen was kind of one of the players that, maybe it made the most sense. So, and this is easier, right? For the Rhodes stuff, if Rhodes is cut, the Vikings still have, I want to say like $5 million that they're liable for on the contract. And so you'd only be able to free up like $8.8 million, if you cut him. And there's not like a void in the contract, nor would he want to because he would be like losing out on guaranteed money. So that's, a more difficult situation. But with the Everson one, it's a pretty clean break for both sides that allows them to kind of get it back, if that's like a good deal for both sides. Without having to deal with like strange accounting. Like if the Vikings cut Xavier Rhodes just to re-sign him at like $1 million a year, they would still be liable for $6 million on the cap this year if they did that. Whereas with Griffen, because he voided the contract, they can negotiate whatever contract they want without any of those constraints.
Yeah, and the other thing with Everson Griffen is just it's hard to say goodbye to him because he's been such a mainstay of the Vikings for years now. And because of his off the field issues, not last season, but the season before, and how he was able to really get things under control and have such a decent season this last year, that it's hard. And he's a sentimental favorite of Vikings fans for a reason. He's a good player. He is incredibly good at getting that jump that turns out to just be a hair too early sometimes.
Yeah, a little bit too early sometimes. Yeah,
just a little bit too early. But his sack totals have been nice. He's been really good for pressure. He will go down with Vikings fans as part of one of the greatest scheme plans of any Vikings playoff game when the Vikings were able to take out the Saints by switching him on the inside. And how incredibly effective that was. Like, Vikings fans will forever appreciate his hard work, but especially in that playoff game. And let's go back to the other Saints playoff game when he was mic'd up and losing his mind on the sidelines when Diggs caught the Minneapolis Miracle catch. So.
Yeah, he's been a part of a lot of big moments, and he's been such a huge personality. So, I
think Linval picked him up. I think Linval physically picked up Everson Griffen to give him a hug, and even Everson Griffen was like, "Really, dude?" Like, damn. All right. So if this is the end for Everson Griffen as a Viking, it's been a pleasure watching you play for Minnesota. If he ends up coming back and ends up restructuring or end up kind of choosing a different path, also good. It's going to suck to see him in a Seahawks uniform. I imagine it's not going to burn you as badly as it will the rest of us, but
Jesus.
It for whatever the talent train used to go that way. I don't know if it still does. But
yeah, I feel like it stopped, yeah.
Well, now it seems like it's Jets, and then it ends up being like Jets and then back to us.
And then back, yeah.
Josh Doxson was picked up today. Vikings legend Josh Doxson was picked up today by the Jets, and I just wanted Twitter to explain that he was not actually signing with the Jets. He was signing back with Minnesota because he decided he couldn't leave Minnesota. He needed to come back to. And see if he could be a member of our practice squad or something. I just wanted that so badly. Oh, poor Jets. All right, the other big news that came out this week involved the CBA, and there's many angles to discuss. Can we just go over the main issues or the main changes that are being offered by the owners, including less of I don't believe there's actually any penalty for just smoking marijuana and having been caught on a drug screen. There's also the discussion of the 17th game. There's also a playoff seventh seed odd implication here, and a few other issues, including how they end up deciding to pay for that 17th game. Can you walk us through some of these ideas?
Yeah, sure. Well, let's take them one by one. The first thing, let's talk about the drug policy change. So, there's a couple of changes to the way that the league will approach marijuana policy. The first is that they'll narrow the testing window for THC from a 4-month window to a 2-week window at the start of training camp. So, if you're worried about, a positive test, you can clear out your system right before training camp. It makes it easier to avoid. But the second, like you mentioned, is that the penalties for testing positive have been reduced. So there's no game suspensions anymore for positive tests, or at least strictly for positive tests. I imagine there would still be fines. And, I would imagine that if you're on like stage 2 or stage 3 of the NFL drug program, that being on stage 3 and knocking a test, will get a game suspension. But, your first test or not being in stage 1 or anything like that, won't get you any suspensions. That doesn't include like being arrested for possession of marijuana. That's different. And so you can violate the drug policy that way and probably get game suspensions, but you cannot get suspended for a test. And then also, in order to mark a positive test, the parts per million, the sample, has to be much, much higher. I think it was like 35 nanograms, was before, and now it's 150, and that's much more in line with, industry standards, like across multiple industries. And that's kind of like a normal, concession. The players have been looking for that, for a long time. And then, the stuff about the additional games and the playoff proposal, what's interesting about that is that NFL owners don't think that they need to consult players. They think they can just do that unilaterally. But in order to avoid like an arbitration/union fight, especially, if you've got, say, a union-friendly administration while that fight is happening, that they would rather it just gets resolved in the CBA, but they will, like, at the negotiating table, they'll say, we can just do this, right? So that's interesting. But in order to kind of soften the blow, they would increase the percentage of revenue handed out to players by a marginal amount. So the amount handed out to players right now is at 47% in terms of the total revenue. So I think it's just media revenue, but so I don't think this like includes like merchandise revenue or stadium tickets, but it might. But of the revenue that comes in to the NFL, which I think is about like $11 billion, 47% goes to the players. That's a reduction actually from the 2006 CBA that was like 50-50. The new proposal brings it up to 48%, which a single percentage point for this year's cap environment would be about $4 million in the cap. So it increases it kind of marginally. And then as you expect, NFL dollars to grow because of their expansion of the TV contracts, the NFL projects that over the course of 10 years, the total, net gain for players is about $5 billion. If they add a 17th game, they increase that revenue share by 0.5%. So that's kind of where the contention is. What's interesting is that if you add that 17th game, players that are currently on contracts for that season that they add the 17th game. So let's say they added in 2021. Any player who has a contract running through the end of 2021 will have their contract credited with another game check, essentially. So your game salary is, say you make $4 million in salary over the course of the year, your game salary is $250,000. You'll be credited that for the 17th game on top of what you already made that season, but it's capped at $250,000. So if you make more than $4 million a year in salary, in base salary, you will not get more than $250,000. There are a couple of problems with this. So the majority of the players don't make more than $4 million a year. So this does affect a smaller portion of players, but it also happens to affect the portion of players that have the most influence, like in a locker room, and then also the players that are on the 32-player voting board. And I'll explain how that works in a second too, if that's not too boring. But that's one problem is that if you make over $4 million a year, your salary is capped. So Russell Wilson, who's the highest paid player in the league, will play a 17th game this season at a 75% discount, which is, I think, wild. But, most players get another week of work. If they want a week of work, that's good for them. If they don't, it's tough, I guess. The other problem with this is that I think it refers to paragraph 5 salary, which I'm pretty confident only refers to base salary. So if you got a signing bonus, your signing bonus was for a contract that you signed for 16 game seasons over, say, the life of a 4-year contract. So you agreed to play 48 games if healthy. And part of your compensation for those 48 games that you committed to playing come in the form of that signing bonus. So if you're a team that hands out a lot of signing bonuses, you pay out less to the players. And the Vikings actually, relative to the total amount of money they hand out, they're actually near the bottom of the league in terms of the amount of cap space consumed by signing bonuses versus by, base salary. So the Vikings would end up paying out more, from a cash flow perspective. From a cap perspective, it doesn't really give teams like any dramatic change in terms of like competitive balance. But in terms of the amount of money coming into players, the players that sign deals with higher signing bonuses will also get screwed in a different way. So that's another problem with that. That sounds like it's a huge sticking point. If you see, the way some of the players have reacted on Twitter, J.J. Watt, Richard Sherman, Quincy Enunwa, David Bakhtiari, who of the 4 people I named, Bakhtiari is the only one that's not is not one of the player reps. They're all resoundingly opposed to this. And so, the argument essentially is the NFL will make the same amount of money on that 17th game than they will for the 16th and the 15th and the 14th and the 13th game. So why should players not also make the same amount of money for that 17th game on their current contracts? Now, when players negotiate a new contract, will not be prorated out. It'll just be split over those 17 checks. And so you don't have to worry about that and it won't be capped or anything like that. But, that creates, especially for the first couple of years, a significant amount of revenue that gets funneled back to ownership instead of to players. So it ends up being not a true 48.5% share. What's interesting about all of this is that labor-intensive industries like the NFL, right, because it's not capital intensive, most of the costs incurred by the NFL are not, the fact that they have to buy like a giant TV or staff a weight room full of like machines or anything like that. It's to pay employees. So it's not like agriculture, which is the opposite. It's a capital intensive industry. Most labor intensive industries actually dole out 60% or more of their revenue to labor. So, this would be a very small amount compared to other industries. But of course, the difference here is that the individual employees, from a relative perspective, make a lot more than a single person would typically need to make in another industry. But second, they don't have negotiating power, right? So if you're in a labor-intensive industry and you're not getting your fair share, let's say like retail, right? If you're making like, if you're in a state that has a low minimum wage and you're making like $8 an hour, you can choose to work somewhere else for $9 an hour, right? You don't have that in the NFL. So, and interestingly, retail is also a labor-intensive industry. So, it is kind of interesting from that perspective. The players, like I said, used to have a 50-50 split, and they had to give that up while negotiating the 2011 CBA. Now, for the seventh playoff game, again, not technically part of the CBA, but I think it's just part of the discussion. It's just, or not seventh playoff game, but seventh seed being able to enter into the playoffs. I hate it. It supercharges the ability of number one seeds to get to the Super Bowl because it increases the likelihood that number two seeds get knocked out.
Mm-hmm. And let's just face it here. This is just another opportunity for another home playoff game for the team that gets second. So it's just another opportunity for more revenue that didn't exist before. And the question is kind of whether or not this cheapens the playoffs. The first two seeds end up getting the week off, end up being able to rest. Now you turn into a situation where only the number one is able to continue. I don't know. It seems like it's an issue of too many teams or too many cooks.
Yeah, exactly.
Too many
I think. I thought the playoff format was like perfect. It's the best playoff format of all the sports, except for the fact that like logistically you can't do a best of 3 or a best of 5 series, like obviously, except for that. But just in terms of like the number of teams that make it, the way that the NFL is organized with 32 teams in 2 conferences of 4 divisions with 4 teams in each division, it's beautiful mathematically, right? And then the 4 division winners plus 2 wild cards. I think that's great. It is so rare that you get a third potential wild card that, quote unquote, deserves it, that, you would want to make it in. In fact, even Football Outsiders looked at the top teams by DVOA that didn't make the playoffs. And, of the 5 top teams, 3 of them wouldn't have made the playoffs anyway under this proposal, because they wouldn't have had the best record. They just would have had like kind of the best performance under DVOA. So only 2 of them really would have made it. That's like, and it's so rare, right? That you actually get a good team is like the 7th team, that you just end up with like bad football where, yeah, you can get an underdog beating like a 2nd seed, which like, I don't know, unless you are the 7th seed, that's like that doesn't necessarily equate into like really great watchable football. And the analogy I use is, typically Thursday night games are worse than Monday night and Sunday night games. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is the short week. But the second is that you're seeing every team play on Thursday night. Monday and Sunday night, they've selected before the season starts, and then, in weeks like 14 through 17 or whenever it is, they flexed to having the most exciting games. But they pick the teams that are the best for Monday night and Sunday night. Thursday gets every team. And so from a national audience perspective, we're seeing 2 games a week that are generally like great, and then 1 game a week that's just like a bunch of average teams or a bad team and a good team. And it's just like not great. And we're getting closer to that in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So I think it's less watchable as football for sure.
And somebody had mentioned the whole like, oh, well, if they did this, and this clearly would have saved Jason Garrett's career in Dallas, because he would have made it how many years into the
that's true.
into the playoffs. Still, it's
you would have coached longer than Marvin Lewis was. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, yeah, he would have been a winning version of Jeff Fisher. It would have been great. No, but this whole thing just seems like it's watering like that aside. It seems like it would be like watering down the playoffs, but.
Yeah, and I really like the idea that if you're good enough for a 2nd seed, your reward is that you get a week of rest. Like, I like that idea. Mm-hmm. I don't want parity in the playoffs. That's not the point. Like, you have to earn it.
Indeed. So I guess the question becomes, and actually I'll hold off on the question here. So as far as the CBA is concerned, this was not a unanimous thing as far as the owners were concerned. There were a few owners who voted against this. And once the analysis come out, a lot of people are saying that this is a worse deal for the NFL Players Association than the one that was signed by the NHL Players Association right after they came back from their strike season.
Yeah, which I don't know if I agree with that, but I think it's a pretty poor deal. And I will say that it's an improvement over the current CBA, which means that it cannot be a worse deal than the one the NFL player signed in 2011. So there's that. But I just okay. So there are some positives, right? So they increased practice squad size to 14. They basically give you like another offensive lineman active on game day, which is it's like basically a third quarterback rule, but for offensive linemen. There's increases in minimum salaries. There you can use the rookie distribution money to provide additional payments to players at minimum salary. 2 players, I think, are exempt from counting against the cap up to a certain amount, which is great for the players because it creates a little bit more latitude. Practice squad salaries increase a little bit. Guaranteed funding rule for guaranteed salaries increases. So there's some stuff that's good for players. I already mentioned the POP policy. Another thing is the disciplinary policy. Initial discipline will be handled by somebody who's not Roger Goodell, but is a neutral third party. I think that's phenomenal for players. Now, if they appeal it, they are appealing to Roger Goodell, but I feel like it's unlikely that they would do that. So that's great. And again, there's an increase in the percentage revenue share and all that. But I don't think generally speaking, it's a great deal for the players. And it seems like the players agree. And, healthcare has increased. The amount of healthcare provided to retired players has increased. You've got life insurance, tuition reimbursement. They've added vision, which I'm shocked was not already part of the healthcare plan. Pension increases by 10%.
You mean Jameis had to do all that eye surgery out of pocket this year?
Yeah, he did. I can't imagine the vision insurance would have covered all of that anyway.
Wow.
Also, vision insurance tends to be crap. So, who knows?
Yeah, but
practice squad players are eligible for additional tuition benefits beyond that. So, if an underclassman declares and they only make the practice squad, they can still kind of pay off their salary. Former players have an increase in their pension. Retroactively too. There's $50,000. I think it's like a health retirement account for vested veterans. There's a network of hospitals, or they expand. They say it's create a new network. I think they expand the network of hospitals in team cities for former players to receive no cost physicals. There's a bunch of good stuff in here for players. But I think what the owners are asking for, which is like another game, which for the first couple of years is going to have, a handicapped salary. I don't think it's necessarily worth it because again, they're negotiating from a position where the anchoring is off of the 2011 CBA, which was awful, and so an improvement on the 2011 CBA does not necessarily a good deal make. But yeah, I don't know. It seems like the players are not super jazzed about this proposal. The executive committee, the people on the player side, the NFLPA executive committee, are the ones that kind of lead the negotiations. And they've been negotiating for over a year now. They're the ones that negotiated the terms that led to the owners drafting this proposal and then voting on it and then submitting it to the players. That committee voted 6-5 against it. Now that vote's non-binding, but they recommended against it to the players. So now the steps are, and it seems like they can void this first step, but I'm kind of surprised by it. But the first step is that the 32 player reps who, I think 56% of them make over $4 million a year, so they're affected by that 17th week rule. If 2/3 of them vote yes, and they round up, so it has to be 22 of the 32 union reps, the player reps. If they vote yes, then it goes to the membership at large, the 2,000 or so players, and a simple majority vote yes, then the CBA is accepted. But, if 12 players vote no, or I think it's 11 players vote no, among the player reps, then it goes back to the drawing board and it doesn't even go to the membership. Now, again, it seems like Tom Pelissero tweeted out something that made it seem like it was possible to avoid it, but I actually don't think that's the case. I think you have to have the player reps vote on it. Stay tuned for all kinds of shenanigans regarding, the CBA and whether or not there's going to be a strike or a lockout or whoever. A strike is when the players refuse to work. A lockout is when the owners refuse to, employ them, I guess. But yeah, there's a lot of improvements in the CBA. It's probably still not good enough, and I think the players are realizing that they've got maybe a little bit more leverage than we initially think, because, people are like, well, players, they can't play anywhere else. They don't have any leverage. Billionaires are billionaires. And that's who you're negotiating with, people who can absorb a loss versus people who can't. But if the players are willing to take a hit, I mean, the reason billionaires, generally speaking, are billionaires is because they like to earn money. And so if they try to hire a bunch of scabs and they essentially become the XFL, but with a talent pool distributed across 32 teams instead of 8, that's hard to watch. You'll lose a lot of money that way.
Yeah.
So the players have maybe more leverage than we usually assume.
And let's be honest, anyone who's been involved with negotiations, whether it's a union or not, the first offer that comes your way is not the one that you want to just throw down and go, yes, this is absolutely what I want to do.
Yeah, so the owners wanted to get this offer out right away, which immediately made a bunch of players suspicious. You can explain that, in a way that doesn't imply that there's anything insidious, by saying they want to get a new deal signed, a new TV deal, because that's going to expire soon. They want to get a new TV deal signed with the new CBA. So if they negotiate a new TV deal without the CBA intact, that media deal decreases in terms of the amount of value those TV networks pay the NFL. So if a CBA is signed, more money will be handed out to the NFL in their negotiations with television networks. So this is like another reason they were really quick to want to get this out there and signed. And that benefits the players. In fact, the NFLPA released a memo indicating that if they sign it right now, that $100 million will be available immediately in terms of like salary cap allocation, for players. Now that only works out to like $60,000 per player. So that's not like an enormous incentive. If you think about it this way, if the players hold out and increase the amount of revenue share by 0.5%, they'll make more over 2 years per player than they will just accepting this deal right now with a one-time bonus essentially of $60,000. But if they wait longer, the TV deal might not be as good. And so the pie that you're drawing from, the percentage that you're getting. So like, let's say you get 49 or even 50% revenue. You'll be getting it from a necessarily smaller pie if they sign the deal later. But if they sign the deal now, they might get 48% of a larger pie. It's super complicated, but you're right. Like from a negotiations perspective, it would be very difficult to say that the players would be correct in accepting this. Now, it's also like not fair necessarily to say this is the first offer, but it is the first formal offer. And it really seems like the players union that was negotiating this did not really see these as terms that were things that they had originally agreed on anyway, because again, they voted against it. So in some ways it's a first offer. In other ways, it's the culmination of over a year of negotiating. So yeah, it's there's a lot going on here. I'm going to love bringing up our boring podcasts from 2011 about this.
There's so many lovely points into all the lovely nooks and crannies as far as this discussion goes. But we'll discuss more when we have more to discuss, which is a terrible sentence, and I almost want to edit it out, but I'm going to leave it in because it truly describes this lovely process known as collective bargaining. Yay!
Hooray!
All right, let's go to the mailbag, and the first question is from Raul, who asks, what is the best storyline for the 2020 draft? The Vikings draft Tavon Diggs, Vikings draft Antoine Winfield Jr., or the Vikings draft Thaddeus Moss?
From a storyline perspective, you have to take into account whether or not the player is going to last on the team. And I don't think Thaddeus Moss, who's Randy Moss's son, is all that great of a player. So I would take him out right away in terms of that. In terms of total player quality, Trayvon Diggs is probably a better pick. He's not as polished as Antoine Winfield Jr., who many project to be a second-round pick, and Trayvon Diggs is a first-round pick. But he's got phenomenal potential, great instincts, great size, and he fits a need for the Vikings a lot better than Winfield does. But from a storyline perspective, I think if they drafted Winfield, he would be on the team for a while because he's very talented. I think that storyline is way better. I think any storyline that revolves around a player that is no longer on the team is always better and safer than a storyline involving a player that is currently on the team.
Yeah.
From a drama perspective, it would be interesting if the Vikings continued to have not like problems, but like additional drama with Stephon Diggs while Trayvon Diggs was on the team. Like that would be like very interesting tea. But from a story, like if you were writing a story, I think Antoine Winfield Jr. coming onto the team is just a much better story because Antoine Winfield Sr. was such a great part of the franchise for so long, and his story is already written. So this is a sequel. Trayvon Diggs coming onto the team like adds a character to the ongoing saga of the Stephon Diggs story, which is turning out to be like a very fascinating story, of course. But you know, we're not writing hagiographies about it, right? Because we don't know how it ends. Like, imagine if we were talking about the Adrian Peterson story in 2012, and we're like, wow, what a great story. He's an all-time Viking. Everybody's going to remember him fondly. Well, like, you know, things change. So, the Winfield, like, you know, it's not done, right? A bunch of stuff came out about Walter Payton, like right after he died, which kind of changes things. And the Lawrence Taylor stuff is kind of complicated for the Giants. But for the most part, it's like done. And so, that chapter of the book is closed. People remember him fondly. He was fantastic. Great. His son's here. So I think the Antoine Winfield Jr. story is better. But I think Trayvon Diggs is like the optimal pick. But storyline, I like. It was a good question. I like the Winfield one though.
It's funny, and the only thing I'll have to say on the Diggs situation, this episode is this and this only. As you can imagine, the only thing that people want to talk about when you mention the Vikings over the last couple of weeks is what the hell's going on with Diggs. And somebody was talking to me about how Diggs is gonna try to moss his way out of Minnesota. To which my only thought was, oh no, that poor parking attendant in downtown Minneapolis. Oh, I hope they have better insurance because, I
heard Moss and the parking attendant like made up. Like he specifically, reached out to them. So that's funny. I think. Well, I mean, it's great, but it's also like kind of funny.
Of all ways to try to get yourself out, yeah. It's not like Culpepper, who was like sending letters to the newspapers and stuff and trying to organize his own release. Just really wanted to play in Florida for a while. Idiot.
Jeez.
All right. William Bodke asks, the Vikings are up against the cap, and some of their veterans need to be replaced with low-cost free agents. I think Andre Patterson and Mike Zimmer can salvage some players on the scrap heap. Who among the following free agents would be a good fit and a bargain? Mike Daniels, Damon Snacks Harrison, Andrew Billings, Vic Beasley, Darqueze Dennard, or Kendall Fuller?
This is a really good question because I think you could make actually a really good argument for any of these. Personally, I would go with Daniels because I don't think he'll cost that much. He was on IR, I think, the entire season. With Detroit, he was cut by the Packers for a reason, and so I don't think he's going to command a high salary. Damon Harrison, of course, was also just cut, so it's not like he's commanding an enormous salary, but I think there's going to be some interest for him. His most recent year was like fine. I think some people are saying that he played poorly, and in some games he played very poorly, but I think for the most part he was like fine. He certainly wasn't the Snacks Harrison that we saw in New York. So he's diminished. So I would say Linval Joseph is playing better than Damon Harrison is. Kendall Fuller, I think he's just going to cost too much. So I wouldn't say that he's necessarily a good fit. And I would say Andrew Billings as a way to kind of replace Linval Joseph. I don't like super love it. If you like made the argument that like you wouldn't be replacing Linval Joseph, he would be backing up Armon Watts. You know, he's a fine backup and Armon Watts might be a reliable starter. You might be in a better spot, but in terms of like cost to return, maybe that's not great. But I think you can get Mike Daniels for very cheap. And if it works out in like a tremendously fantastic way for you. And if it doesn't, he's cheap, right? So you don't have to worry about it too much. So that's my answer there. I think Fuller's probably too expensive. I think Harrison is probably overpaid relative to what he provides. Although he would be, definitely cheaper than Linval is. I think that in terms of, bargain to return, you're getting a lot out of Daniels.
Next question is from Seth, who asks, could the Vikings franchise tag Anthony Harris and then look to trade him?
So when this question was asked, somebody else replied with, why the hell would the Vikings do that? To which the question asker said, if the Vikings can't keep it, they might as well get something for him walking away. Which, I mean, they would, get something anyway, right? Because they get a third-round compensatory pick if he walked away and signed with another team. But that would be in the 2021 draft, not in the 2020 draft. The Vikings could get something right away for him and be able to replace him with the pick compensation that they would get. It would not be a great pick. I would imagine it's potentially closer to a second round, maybe, than a first round pick, just because he's only under contract for 1 year. That 1 year contract is pretty onerous. The franchise tag is $12.7 million for safeties this year. And then they would have to provide a similar level of contract over the course of the next season and have to negotiate with him for that too. So you would not be able to have, like, say, the long-term security of Diggs or a rookie that you're trading, so you wouldn't necessarily be able to get a first-round pick. You could also choose to transition tag him. So the transition tag is the average of the top 10 salaries instead of the top 5 salaries of the position, like the franchise tag is. And so that only costs $10.8 million. You sign a player on the transition tag, you can still trade them. The problem, of course, is that the reason it's cheaper is that another team can choose to offer a full contract to that player on the transition tag. If that happens, the Vikings, or the original team that offered the tag, can match. And if the Vikings match, that contract has to be signed by the player to the Vikings. But, if the Vikings don't match because the contract doesn't work for them for whatever reason, then that player goes to the other team, and the Vikings get no compensation at all. And that would be pretty dangerous because the Vikings don't have cap space. Other teams know that. They would craft a deal that would exploit this in the very same way I think that the New England Patriots took Chris Hogan from the Bills. The Bills, I think, offered like a second round tender or something like that, or an original round tender, and he was undrafted, so it would have been no draft compensation at all. The Patriots gave Chris Hogan a contract that was impossible for the Bills to be able to match because it exploited the fact that the Patriots had a ton of year one cap space in the contract and the Bills didn't. And so the Bills had to decline. And I think that the same thing would happen to the Vikings. So probably not transition tag. But I would say if you're willing to pay him $12.7 million a year this year because of the franchise tag, you should probably be able to pay him whatever you want over the course of the next 5 years without having to take a bad cap hit in year one. That's only in the case where, like, you feel like you can get something done. There's no indication that the Vikings would not be able to work out a deal with Anthony Harris other than cap considerations. Like, I don't think there's any animosity between Harris and the rest of the team. I think he likes the team. I think he wants to come back. So, I don't think that you would need to franchise tag him. But if you felt like, he wasn't going to stay with the team, you could franchise tag him, which is like kind of a dick move, but from the perspective of like management, makes sense. Franchise tag him and then trade him. Yeah, it's possible. I don't think it's like a scenario that makes a ton of sense. Plus, if you franchise tag him, he would need to essentially say, no, I'm going to hold out, like Le'Veon Bell did, which, obviously didn't work out for Bell. He's a running back though. That's the scenario where you would trade him. But the Vikings maybe also don't want to cave into players and set a precedent either. So even that might be kind of fraught with danger too.
Yeah. Not something that seems overly likely, if anything. David Rose asks, who will sign Tamu to a camp deal? I think he has a good chance to be quarterback 2 or a practice squad guy. Dude has been playing unreal. Would love to see him as a Vikings QB second or third guy.
Yeah, so David Rose has been tweeting at me. He's a big St. Louis Battlehawks fan from the XFL. I did not think that there would be people that would be this committed in a genuine, non-ironic way to an XFL.
Lifelong Battlehawks fan.
He seems to be an actual fan, which is cool. He just attached himself to a team right away. Most of the people who are whatever fans on Twitter are literally just whatever fans. It's just hilarious to be yeah, I'm a DC Defenders fan, for no reason. But yeah, David Rose, all in. Yeah, Jordan Ta'amu has, or is it Ta'amu? Jordan Ta'amu has been playing really, really well in the XFL. I think he's the third best quarterback, maybe second best quarterback. Once you remove all the kind of splash plays from PJ Walker's kind of resume and look at it from a play-to-play perspective instead of just looking at his best plays. I think Ta'amu, Cardale Jones, and Philip Walker have all demonstrated that they've got at least NFL backup quality. At least in the XFL, they've demonstrated that. And I think Ta'amu, who I would have thought was like a 4th-round pick, I think he fell further in the draft. He was pretty efficient in college. Obviously, he's throwing to like DK Metcalf and AJ Brown and another good receiver, and so he should have done maybe better. But the offense was actually pretty good. What does a good quarterback with good receivers look like? It looks basically like what Ole Miss looked like. So I think he's going to get another shot. I think he could be a QB2. He's got running upside. It looks like he's improved his accuracy. He's making decisions fairly quickly. That's all nice to see. So yeah, I think that he's one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the XFL. People are only talking about the 2. He's number 3, possibly even better than one of those 2. And he should get a shot.
Brad Davis asks the next question, which is, if we are in a pass-happy league, why not try having 3 D linemen, 2 linebackers, and then 2 corners, 2 safeties, and 2 tweeners? Make them all fast and swarm the ball carrier.
Let me do the math real quick. 5, 6, 11. Yep, that checks out. Well, I would say the reason you do that is because you're inhibiting your pass rush first, unless the tweeners are defensive line linebacker tweeners, but it sounds like they're linebacker safety tweeners. While I do believe coverage is king when it comes to the way defenses should be designed in the NFL, I would not restrict yourself to a 3-person pass rush. I think coverage is king in an environment that's been tested with primarily 4-person pass rushes. So I would still get 1 pass rusher, but if it's 4 defensive linemen, 1 linebacker, 2 corners, 2 safeties, and a tweener, well, the Vikings were kind of doing that with Jaron Kearse. I think that having a fast team is better than having a big team when it comes to designing NFL defenses. I think that the way kind of coverage has evolved, people have been moving more and more towards your Eric Wilson or Mark Barron or Deion Buchanan type players. Now, Mark Barron and Deion Buchanan were overrated for a long time because of this, but I think you are moving in that direction. Linebackers now regularly, 220 pounds. Whereas I think even 5 years ago, that was really light. We're already kind of moving that direction. I don't love the idea of like substituting one of those tweeners for a defensive lineman unless you were super blitz happy and you had, one of those tweeners was like a Shaquem Griffin that was like a safety and a linebacker, but a really good pass rusher, or like Derwin James. And then one of your linebackers is also a really good pass rusher, like Anthony Barr or something like that. In that case, 3 defensive linemen, 2 tweeners, 2 linebackers, 2 corners, 2 safeties, that all makes sense. But for the most part, I think that you lose something by removing specialization because you're very unlikely to be good at all of the things that you want to be good at if you don't have specialization, which is why tweeners usually have such a difficult time in the NFL. Because if you're not like good at one job, you're kind of wasting someone's time. That if you could do like 8 jobs like decently, that pays you less and gives less to the team than doing one job really well. So
a bit like the restaurant that has too many things on its menu to be good at any of them.
Oh, yes, exactly. Yep.
So, postmodern Carol list, which we checked, and it's a Pete Carroll reference and not a not anything. Not Lewis Carroll or Christmas Carol enthusiasts, anything like that. First question, could an NFL lockout over the new CBA benefit the XFL?
Not as much as you would think. So the problem here is that NFL contracts end in March, and so any lockout would occur after March. That is the middle of the XFL season. Now, normally you just say, well, who cares? The XFL could just sign all those players in March anyway. Well, the problem is that they just played a season, and so they're tired and they want to rest. And so you'd have to pay them a lot. They don't have a lot of money. The way they get money is by signing TV deals. Now, the XFL is on a 1-year TV deal negotiating thing, right? And so after the year, their TV deal expires, they have to negotiate a new TV deal. Now, you would think, hey, with a lockout, they would be able to negotiate a much better TV deal, right? And that would be true if the timing was right. But we don't know if a lockout is happening until next March. And so they'll have negotiated that deal by then already. And maybe they could price in the likelihood of a lockout and say, hey, more people are going to be watching because of it or whatever. But from the perspective of like a TV executive, you probably wouldn't want to pay that, because for a fan, it's kind of the same thing no matter what, because the Super Bowl will have ended. Then the XFL starts like a week later. Fans have not been meaningfully deprived of football because of the lockout, and players are just finishing the season. So you're probably, and they're under contract with the NFL until March. So you're probably not getting any of those players, unless they're like a practice squad guy that was hoping to sign a futures contract and didn't, getting any of those players into the XFL right away, which is like very frustrating. If the XFL was in the summer, and that's when you did it, like the likelihood would be a lot better, because they could delay their TV negotiations until then, sign a bunch of new contracts, and then pay out more money. But if you're like Chase Daniel and you're making like $10-15 million a year doing literally nothing, except apparently beating the Vikings, why would you take $100,000 from the XFL? Like, that's nothing. That's ridiculous. So you're probably not getting those players that would be super interesting to get. Like, you're not getting your Taysom Hills and your Joe Webbs and your Chase Daniels and so on. You'd be getting like your Jake Brownings, which is like better, I guess, than most of these XFL quarterbacks, but like not in a way that makes you think, the lockout was the best thing that ever happened to the XFL. Exactly. Fans won't have missed any meaningful football. They'll be going until March, or until actually the day of the draft, which is when their final game is played. I think it's the day after the final day of the draft is when their championship game is played. And then that's when you get to know football. And so the lockout won't have affected the amount of football fans will have absorbed up until that point. So probably not, but the talent pool will increase, right? Because some of those players that were hoping to make some money might have waited for the season to start, but with the threat of a looming lockout, might just sign with the XFL right away to get some cash right away. So it would increase the talent pool, but probably not as much as we think.
Next question is from Duke's Code, which I love the fact that they've become their own like account and are tweeting other things. They've become sentient out there. Duke's Code asks, how many XFL teams could beat our Dukes? Or rather, how many XFL teams could our Dukes beat? Slightly different meaning there. Our Dukes.
Our Dukes. The James Madison Dukes, phenomenal team that deserves to win. That deserves to have won the national championship in the FCS. They got robbed in ways that I won't specify and will be extremely vague about.
I like how I watched the game and you didn't. I just love that fact. I mean, you were in San Francisco in the press box before the divisional round of the playoffs.
Significant portions of the game.
I watched the final play. I watched the whole game and including the final play.
You have that over me, I'll admit. But as a lifelong Dukes fan, I know in my heart what happened. Mm-hmm. They got robbed. So would the extremely talented Dukes be able to beat the mediocre XFL? Certainly they would not be able to beat an all-star XFL team, which also probably means they would not be able to beat the DC Defenders, who are the all-star XFL team.
Correct.
I don't think they'd beat Houston or St. Louis.
Nope.
I think they could maybe put something up against the New York Guardians if the Guardians were starting McGloin, but I doubt it.
Hold on. Before we continue, McGloin last week talking about how we need to change the entire offensive game plan right before going into the half may be the finest moment of the entire 2020 XFL season.
Yeah, like entering the locker room, like, oh yeah, my coaches are idiots. Bye. What?
And the coach didn't know. The coach was told on the sidelines that he did it. And the coach was like, well, I guess I'll have to talk to him. Oh, look, this is what a bench is called. Have you seen a bench before?
It was incredible. And like, McGloin, what are you doing, man? The receivers are open. It cannot be the game plan.
Oh.
Incredible. No, I think, in all honesty, I think the best FCS team, the Dukes, would get mauled by the worst X. The real question is like, how many teams would LSU beat? And I think probably 7 of them. I would probably take the DC Defenders. So the problem here, right, is that like the best players on that LSU squad are like definitely and obviously better than even the best players in an XFL All-Star squad, right? Like I would take Joe Burrow over Cardale Jones. Obviously, right? He's the first overall pick. Like he's going to be better than Cardale Jones, a 4th round pick who got drummed out of the league. Maybe unfairly, but like whatever, right? I would take like Lloyd Cushenberry and Damian Lewis over their best offensive linemen. The two problems here are that the age difference is significant. Players hit their athletic peak at 28. I've talked about this before. But the second thing is, the bottom of that roster is like worse than the bottom of an XFL roster by far, right? Because it's people that can't make that aren't even like not even camp invites, right? And so like, it's really great that like your secondary is filled with like 4 first round picks. But like that defensive end and that linebacker, they can't hack it in the Arena League. So we're just going to run at them all day. So that's the interesting thing. I would think LSU loses to the DC Defenders. I would think they would beat almost anybody else. The Houston game would be just insanely fun to watch, but I think the PJ Walker just throwing up prayers. I think like Christian Fulton and Derek Stingley and Grant Delpete, they like come down with a couple of those balls that like, and Thula Kelly doesn't. So,
yeah,
that's a fun, I would watch the hell out of that.
LSU's defenders also know how to wrap up and tackle, which is unlike most of the tackling I've seen in the XFL. So
yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, LSU knows how to tackle because they've been playing in the SEC, which means they're forced to learn how to tackle, as opposed to the XFL, which is just not encouraging defenses to tackle.
Right? Yeah, like almost explicitly. The one thing that gives me pause is that I think XFL defensive lines would beat up on that offensive line. It's a great offensive line, but just think about like how many rookies struggle, even the ones that ended up being like good NFL players. How many rookies struggle? These guys are like 30 and still bench like 400, right? Like the older defensive linemen are like super built in ways that like the 22-year-old is not. So that's the other thing that concerns me.
Yeah.
But other than that,
it really does turn into the situation of men versus boys at that point. Like guys just getting tossed around. Let's go to Eddie, who asks, in any round, who will the Packers trade up with to snipe a player from the Vikings, and who will they select?
So who would they trade away in order to trade up to snipe the Vikings?
Who will the Packers trade up with? So
they'll trade up to Denver because Denver needs receivers, right? So they could trade down and be comfortable in this draft. Mm-hmm. And then the Packers would draft. So that's at pick 15 or something like that. And then the Packers would draft Josh Jones from Houston. Do they need a guard? Do they need an offensive lineman? I'm just thinking about who would screw the Vikings. Well, I don't know if the Packers like need that guy.
Well, you'd think that the two biggest decisions are probably like, okay, well, they need the Vikings. What do they need? They need pass defense. They need offensive line. Yeah, let's just take an offensive lineman off the board for him. Let's just mess with him a little bit.
I would love the idea that they draft an offensive lineman in the first round just to deny him.
Yeah, exactly. We're actually just going to toss him on the practice squad for 2 years.
He seems good. Yeah, who knows?
He might develop, right? Right. Kyle Slaby asks, which current Viking is most likely to be an XFL MVP candidate next year?
Well, Amir Abdullah certainly is, I think, a candidate for that because I think he would tear that league up, and he might have to.
What about Sherrills?
I think he's a little too old. There's just like not that many 30-year-olds in the XFL. There's a couple. In fact, Well, 32-year-old S.J. Green, like a CFL All-Star, 8-time All East Conference champ or whatever they call it. East. They're pro. He's an 8-time Pro Bowler, but CFL version of that.
Yeah.
And like a 3-time All Pro. He's 34, and he like plays for Tampa Bay for some reason. That's like unique. All the other old guys are basically defensive linemen, and then you've got like a bunch of 22 to 25-year-olds playing like cornerback and stuff. And like Marcus Sherrills is like 31, and he's like way more money than any of these XFL guys. So I don't see it. I see Amir Abdullah potentially doing it. I also see Jake Browning doing it, and I could see Browning being better than like 6 of those quarterbacks. So yeah.
Which of the 2019 non-playoff rosters would you take over the Vikings going forward? You get all of their current draft picks, contracts, etc. You just keep the name, location, and the history of the Vikings.
So the roster, in my head, excludes coaches. So you get to keep the Vikings coaches, right?
So the players were at some players-only retreat and the plane crashed?
Well, it's like a Freaky Friday or something. Like, the players just flop. I don't know. They do it on a dare. Who knows? But the coaches stay the same.
Part of the new CBA.
It's just part of the new CBA.
We're contracting the team, the Vikings, but we're keeping all the history and the names and just sliding in the Giants.
Definitely not my pick. I would take the Dallas Cowboys 100%. And that's even though you would have to make decisions on Dak Prescott, Amari Cooper, and Byron Jones. If you did it today, you've got an exclusive negotiating window and you've got their cap space. And then I don't know, like just trade Zeke or something. It doesn't matter. But that is like a crazy talented roster that just like needs good coaches. They haven't had them. Dak led the league in expected points added among quarterbacks, in completion percentage over expected. He's like a top 5, I think, by PFF grade. Yeah, do that because you're going to pay Dak a little bit more than the Vikings are going to pay that are paying Kirk, and you're going to get way more out of it. Plus, you've got a receiver that is about as good as Diggs, right? But it doesn't seem to be as much of a pain in the ass if you're an anti-Diggs guy. So yeah, you just draft a receiver in this like incredibly receiver-rich draft to pair with Amari Cooper. You've got this phenomenal offensive line, which sure it's overrated, but it's still a top 5 offensive line. Great. And this defense that's like weirdly super talented that no one ever talks about. It's got a good pass rusher. It's got like 3 great linebackers. You only need 2. And you know, they've kind of figured out the safety stuff. Byron Jones again, great cornerback. Again, you have to sign him again, but yeah, I would take the Dallas situation so long as we're counting the fact that they get that exclusive negotiating window before the official beginning of free agency. Like, so if they did it now as opposed to like at the end of March or whatever.
So here's a team that is kind of an interesting pick. What about Tampa Bay? Minus, well, I mean, we don't know what Jameis Winston's going to look like with corrected eye surgery.
Right.
For the record, he may actually grow into his status as less athletic, less accurate version of Dante Culpepper. But that's a very interesting roster, and it seems like it's a couple moves away, and everyone seems to pick them every preseason. Like, boy, the Bucs look good. The Bucs made some good moves, and then they fall on their face for whatever reason. Quarterback, but you know, there's options there.
Yeah, where do the Bucs pick? That's because you get their current draft picks, right? So like, where do the Bucs pick? I don't know if we want to keep me typing as part of the.
The Bucs are the Bucs pick 14th.
Ooh, it's kind of like just outside the range of like being able to get a quarterback. If they could draft a quarterback, I guess if they could, we'd be talking about it all the time. And
send Jameis as a backup to Detroit and take number 3. Like,
well, you can't because he's a free agent, right? Like, it's just like, yeah. Because you end up with a roster that has a better offensive line than the Vikings, not by like an enormous amount, but enough. One of the very few rosters in the NFL that has a better receiving core than the Vikings. a tight end that everyone loves, OJ Howard. I mean, I loved him too, but hasn't done anything yet. It's like an interesting offense. Is that defense good enough? I tend not to think so. I would definitely still take the Cowboys. Like, I just can't imagine, like, the Cowboys as a team with coaching, that's like that's a really good team. I guess the other option here is the Rams, right? Because you get Jared Goff, you get that receiving core, you get that offensive line. But if we're sticking to you don't get the coaching rule, I don't know how Jared Goff does outside of Sean McVay, so I don't know if I'd pick them. It'd be nice to have it'd be phenomenal to have Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey and, I don't know, I guess Dante Fowler or whoever that edge rusher is. I mean, and you'd still have to pay Corey Littleton, but for the most part, you're fine on that end. It'd be great to have that, some elements of that defense, but I think the Cowboys are better from a roster perspective.
What was I reading this week about the Rams picking up another corner? I'm trying to remember the corner.
They're going after Darius Slay.
Yeah, it was like the Rams going after Darius Slay. And I don't remember if it was you or somebody else saying that the Rams seem to be building their defense around the meme of like, you have $15 to build your team.
Yeah, I saw that too. That wasn't me. I wish I tweeted that.
It's like, oh, that actually does. Like, how do you make your cap work like that? I don't. Okay.
Yeah, they've transcended the cap. They've hit counting nirvana.
The cap is actually the person who runs cap science for them is actually Q from Star Trek. It's fine.
Yeah, it's not magic. It's just sufficiently advanced technology.
Exactly. Why is anyone confused by any of this? Matt McKeon asks, now that nearly all teams are chasing a Super Bowl window based around a rookie quarterback, this unique market distortion seems due for correction. Thoughts?
Yeah, so I hadn't had this thought until like only a couple of months ago. I guess I just didn't think about it very much. But like the union should push for higher rookie salaries. They screwed their veterans by demanding such a restrictive rookie cap because as soon as that happened, teams did the natural thing and they started valuing rookies so much more because of the impact of that rookie contract, making it just like not worth it to keep a 31-year-old veteran or whatever, right? And the ultimate impact of that is that rookies are dramatically underpaid, way too underpaid, significantly underpaid relative to the value that they tend to provide. And I think some analyses have showed that in a really significant way that on average, your rookie is providing significantly more excess value than how much you're paying them. That just happens to be true. And it's not just rookie quarterbacks. It's rookie almost everything. And so rookies are underpaid and that kind of screws them. But, it also screws veterans because then they'll choose, these rookies that we're really uncertain about, instead of veterans. And so veterans are being forced to retire sooner. Add that to the fact that veterans seem to be retiring voluntarily at a higher rate due to concussion concerns. And now you've got a dearth of experience in the league. So it does help some rookies who would otherwise not be able to hang it, get some more years to develop and so on. But for the most part, I think it does reduce the quality of football being played. And it really hurts the ability of longtime veterans to stick onto rosters because teams would rather grab a draft pick because of the rookie cap. So I think counterintuitively to help veterans, they should increase the rookie salary cap. And I thought the initial push to create a rookie cap generally was really smart because teams were forced to essentially engage in like this really insane, weird arms race for like the top quarterback in any particular draft and pay them an enormous amount of money for football that they hadn't yet played. And it would like crater and blow up. And now teams can rebound a lot faster because they're no longer tied to this like $80 million guaranteed contract or whatever it is for this rookie. And so there's a happy medium there, which I think can improve the overall quality of football, encourage veterans to stay in the game, and, essentially not only have like, because you're ending up in a situation where your 53 is it's not your best 53. It's like your most cost effective 53. And so you end up where less capable rookies, second year and third year players are replacing more capable veterans. So that, I think, is the correction. And it hadn't occurred to me that the way to protect veterans was to increase the salary cap for rookies until just a couple months ago. But it really screwed with veterans. Like the average retirement age in the NFL for players that I think, what was it? For people who have already finished 3 years as people who've started over half their games, the retirement age is like much earlier than it used to be. And I think it's because teams are opting for people on rookie contracts because rookie contracts are just so crazy cheap.
Just one more thing that Jamarcus Russell ruined for the NFL.
Yes. And it's funny because he's like the poster child for it, but like Sam Bradford was like the last beneficiary of it, and he got a crazy good deal. Like
he got so much money and played so little football for it.
Yeah, like his contract timing, like it's Darrelle Revesian, like, or however you want to put it. Like the timing on every new contract he signed was just beautiful for him.
Nobody made more money by playing less football than Sam Bradford. I'd actually like to do a study on that and see if that's fully accurate. Like the amount of games that he missed due to season-ending injuries, with all of that money possibly being guaranteed. That might be interesting to do a deep dive on. I don't think anyone involving the Vikings should, because we have our own problems to handle. But interesting idea. Michael asked, Arif wanted that offensive tackle instead of Bradbury in the draft last year. If there had been an alternate reality of the season and that choice had been made, how would it have played out, and what kind of offensive line player will the Vikings be prioritizing this year?
So I think the tackle that you're talking about, in fact, I'm pretty confident the tackle you're talking about is Andre Dillard, who still, I don't believe, has started a game for the Eagles because Jason Peters is not yet retired, and that's kind of the person that he's replacing. But he has played in the preseason. He has played a little bit in the regular season to deal with injury. He started 3 games, but he's played, like 34 snaps here, 7 snaps here, and for the most part has not been good. One of the things that really bothers me about my takes is that I'm just much more capable of remembering my hits than my misses, which is like a human thing. But I'd like to like hold myself accountable a little bit more often. Plus, I sound like kind of a dick when people are like, "What are your biggest hits? What are your biggest misses?" Oh, my biggest hit's Michael Thomas. My biggest miss is, oh boy, yeah, I have no idea. Like, so that like just sounds kind of stupid, right? But for right now, Andre Dillard has not been playing very well. So that, I think, is an interesting question because Garrett Bradbury is also not playing very well. How would Andre Dillard play if he'd been starting, all 17 games, right? Because they played the wild card game, instead of, 3 games plus a significant portion of a fourth or something like that. Or I guess he has 4 starts. Well, probably not amazingly. I think his tools are even better than Bradbury's tools from like a physique perspective. From what I have seen, I would say I actually like the flashes that Bradbury's put together a little bit more. And so I'm a little bit more optimistic about the direction Bradbury's going to go in than I am about Andre Dillard. So in that case, I would probably be wrong. The one kind of ameliorating fact to that is that tackles are just worth way more. So if Andre Dillard pans out to become an average tackle versus like Bradbury becoming an above average center, that's still a better draft. Dillard would end up being a better draft pick. But it doesn't seem like that's kind of what we're approaching. So obviously a good center is better than a bad tackle, almost entirely because tackles are more valuable. Like the reason they're valuable is because the difference between a bad one and a good one is so enormous, and they play a more important position. So the way that the Vikings will be approaching this draft is probably not too dissimilar, because they'd still be looking for an interior offensive lineman in the exact same way that they're looking for one now. Because Bradbury shifted Elflein over, and Elflein replaced Easton, right? Who was supposed to play, but really replaced Tom Compton. And then Josh Klein replaces Mike Remmers, right? Here, maybe you sign Josh Klein, and then maybe Andre Dillard pushes Riley Reif inside. You still have Efline playing center, and so you're still looking for one. But this is a much better center draft than I think the previous one. So you could get Nick Harris late. I didn't really love what he did at the Senior Bowl, but he's like a super athlete. He actually has the same strengths and weaknesses as Bradbury. Or Cesar Ruiz from Washington, who's even better. Or not, no, Nick Harris is from Washington, but Cesar Ruiz, another interior offensive lineman. Damian Cushenberry. It's a better center class, so you'd probably be in a better position, but it's also a better tackle class, so who knows? I would say the Vikings are probably worse off if they'd followed my advice in that scenario.
It takes a big man to, I'd say, admit something like that, but you're not going to remember this conversation anyway, like 10 minutes from now.
What are we talking about?
Exactly. Another question from Duke's Code, which I was going to group with the other one, but appear to have forgotten. Didn't hear this one answered on the machine, but I am curious on the calculus. What is a more egregious waste of resources? Signing Cook to a Zeke-sized contract or drafting his replacement in the first round?
So I've been thinking about this since I saw it originally asked on the machine, because it's a really good question and I didn't quite have an answer. But my understanding of the way contract dollars play out in terms of their contribution to wins, actually, because of rookie contracts, is much smaller now than it used to be. And I think, because of rookie contracts. And so how much a first round pick can give you in terms of wins is often more. The contract value is kind of both, right? So, or it's kind of similar, right? So if you sign, Dalvin Cook to like, what's Zeke signed for? Like 12 million, 15 million a year, some crazy number like that. The trade-off is now you don't get, the 12 million a year to sign someone else, right? And so the value is a $12 million contract. If you draft someone in the first round at a position where you would have gone after someone in free agency, that is also about $12 million. So, potentially, right? The value of a first round pick is pretty high. So I would say it's probably that first round pick is probably the bigger waste because, the marginal value of additional dollars is just not that much compared to the marginal value of a draft selection. Plus the money impact on your actual cap is probably similar. You can find bargains in free agency probably a little bit better than you can for a non-running back first round pick, especially at things like offensive tackle or quarterback. I would say that the bigger waste is drafting his replacement in the first round. So of the two options, I guess I'd prefer to sign Dalvin Cook to a crazy contract.
Next question is from Chris, who asks, is there a context? Is there a reality where Kirk Cousins is not with the Vikings in 2021 and Spielman and Zimmer still have jobs?
Aside from like career-ending injury, which is like a cop-out obvious answer, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think so. Imagine a scenario where the Vikings go to the playoffs again, and this time they're one and done instead of, I guess, two and done or whatever you want to call it. It's super difficult to fire a playoff coach. It's been done, right? The Titans did it. The Bengals did it. The Cowboys almost did it. It's super and I remember that Lovie Smith was fired after a 10-win season too. Not a playoff season, but a 10-win season. It's super difficult to fire a playoff coach coming off of a season where they make the playoffs. If you've identified the problem is the quarterback, or the quarterback is letting his contract expire and he thinks he can get a bunch more money elsewhere than with the Vikings, he's just like, maybe this environment was right for me and he moves on, then I don't think that's on Spielman or Zimmer. Then I think you get to keep them and you give them basically just one more shot with a quarterback of their choice. I think that's the scenario, right? But I think the other scenario is the Vikings draft a quarterback this year, in the first or second round, like make it very clear, right? If they draft a quarterback this year, they made it clear that this person was going to be like a potential quarterback of the future. So say, Jacob Eason, who's now being projected as a first round pick, but for the most part was predicted as a second round pick. Say the Vikings like trade back in the first round or have a pick in the top of the second round for whatever reason somehow, and they drafted Jacob Eason. He would very clearly be the heir apparent to Kirk Cousins. So he's not on the roster in 2021. He's a bridge quarterback very clearly, and then Jacob Eason takes over. If you do well with Cousins, well enough that you conclude that, yes, Spielman and Zimmer still know what they're doing. They still did a good job, but not well enough that you could be like, yeah, we can win with Cousins. Then, that's the other scenario where they're on the roster. Most scenario or on staff, most scenarios where you don't have Kirk in 2021, you're probably right. One or both of them get fired. Yeah. So, I mean, there's probably a lot of pressure on them.
Just a little bit. Damian Barrett asks, I'm still on the fence about this whole Patreon subscription. Will I get bonus pods on Minnesota-centric movie and TV reviews if I sign up? I'm willing to do a watch along for the movie Drop Dead Gorgeous if you are. That's the most Minnesotan movie that exists.
Hey, besides the Mighty Ducks? Even
more so than the Mighty Ducks.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, sure.
And it's about a competition, so it's a beauty competition, but it's a competition nevertheless. From Mount Rose, Minnesota. I'm totally down if you are.
Mount Rose. Yep.
Awesome. Don from Ohio asks, how many draft picks will it take to trade Diggs?
Well, I mean, it could just be one draft pick, right? It could be like the 7th overall pick or something, right? The Vikings probably say yes to that.
The Lions 3rd overall.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I would do that in a heartbeat. I don't care that they're in division and that they would have Kenny Golladay, Stephon Diggs, and Marvin. I have the 3rd overall pick. That's insane. I would either draft Tua Tagovailoa if his medicals check out, or I would use a trade down and get 80 picks. That's a crazy good return on investment.
How the hell are you making 7 picks in the first 2 days? Easy. We traded Diggs to Detroit. He's just never going to smell a championship ever.
Yeah, right.
Playoffs?
Rip. And then you could draft 2 receivers to make up, you're fine. So that's one scenario, but for the most part, I've been projecting that he goes for a 1st and a 3rd. Score North just asked the question, would you trade Diggs for a 1st, a 3rd, and Mohamed Sanu? Obviously, it depends on the 1st and the 3rd. If it's the Patriots 1st and the 3rd, which is the obvious kind of scenario here, probably not. That's that's a low 1st, that's a low 3rd. It's Mohamed Sanu. Sanu is clearly not worth a 2nd round pick, despite the fact that the Patriots traded for that. He's probably worth...
That was a desperation trade. That was not a quality of player trade. That was a holy hell, we need somebody to catch balls from Tom Brady trade.
Yeah, they just did not have receivers.
No.
They plan on having one of them. But...
yeah. God. I was going to make a joke about Antonio Brown, but it was too sad. when your life is too sad for me to make a joke about on Norse Code, boy, you should really reevaluate your priorities.
But yeah, what's the new worth? Probably a 6th at this point. So a low 1st, a low 3rd, and a 6th? Probably not. But a general 1st, a 3rd, and Mohamed Sanu? Yeah, definitely, easily. So yeah, it could be 2 picks, it could be 3 picks, it could be 1 pick, provided it's high enough in the draft. What do you think the reaction would be if the Vikings traded Stephon Diggs in division for the 3rd overall pick?
Boy, that... Well, I know my buddy in Detroit in the Detroit area would lose his mind.
Right, so the national media are wow, Detroit's a bunch of idiots, right? Mm-hmm. And the Detroit media is this is dumb. But Minnesota media, there's at least a lot of fans would have to be screw you, I like Diggs.
Yeah, there would be a lot of there'd be a lot of anger at management at that point. You actually allowed Diggs to leave. You allowed the guy who caught the Minneapolis Miracle to go in division. Really?
Yeah, and it's
it would take a Super Bowl to shut people up.
Right, but Yeah, it totally would. But it's like you trade Diggs away and then you like get Jerry Jeudy or whoever you think the top receiver is. You get Jerry Jeudy in the first round. Plus you got another first round pick on like Josh Jones or whatever. And then in the second round, you can be like, yeah, I grabbed the next best second round receiver, who just happens to have been somebody that would have been drafted in the first round in other years, Brandon Ayuk. And now you've got a better receiving core than you would have had with Diggs. And then you still have that offensive tackle. And then in the third round, you've got two picks, right? And so, or maybe 3 picks, depending on, how the compensatory pick formula works out. And so then you've got, your ability to draft a cornerback and a defensive tackle and an edge rusher or something. Wow. That's great. Holy crap. So after the draft, you might just be like, well, okay, there's clearly a plan here. They've got a better receiving core than they did before. But man, it would be pretty intense for a while.
I think that if the Vikings didn't have the history involving Troy Williamson, and
that's huge. Yeah.
I think
but also like Randy Moss is like worth more than like the 7th overall pick. It's the best receiver of all time, right? Like Stephon Diggs is like good. It's a different category of question.
Like, don't get me wrong, Diggs is phenomenal. Diggs is not the GOAT. So
right.
it's hard. Like, if the Vikings didn't have the history with Troy Williamson and it being fairly recent, like 20 years, 15, 20 years is still fairly recent in fans.
It's in a lot of people's DNA. Like, yeah, for sure. But like, what if we think about it in terms of like the Percy Harvin trade? Like that worked out pretty well for the Vikings.
It did. I don't think that Percy Harvin was as beloved as Diggs is.
That's pretty fair.
Yeah. Matt Myrick asks, how do you see them determining the matchups for the 17th game? I feel the current system is elegant and fair in determining opponents, and is there a way to continue that with an extra game? Should it be some sort of neutral site to avoid the extra home game for half the league?
So this has just not been figured out or resolved yet, which is very frustrating to me.
Especially if this is being floated the way it has been.
Yeah. So it would not be an international series. They're basically just full up. They're just not going to add more international series games. So it wouldn't be that. My idea for neutral sites would be for southern states, have them in those college stadiums, right? So have them in like Tuscaloosa for like a Saints Falcons game, right? In on a weekend that they wouldn't be, because it's like in December, right? So on a weekend that they wouldn't be playing. And then in northern states, you'd have to do it for like away games for those college stadiums, or you could do it like in old NFL stadiums, like St. Louis, right? Would be a great place to have a neutral site game. So that's kind of how I would view it. And then obviously some of those neutral site games would be like the one in Mexico City and the one in London and stuff like that. So you'd still do that.
I don't want to see one at the Horseshoe for OSU. Just that many fans. I don't know if you could.
A Cleveland-Cincinnati game at the Horseshoe?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's great.
If you had a situation where both of those teams were any good, that would be a real fun atmosphere.
Well, let's not be too pie in the sky.
Well, fine.
But yeah, so there's a bunch of great ideas for neutral site games. But it would not be international. I think finding a way to do, and you'd have to do 16 neutral site games a year. So it's not impossible, but it's difficult. So that would be great. And then you'd mark it as neutral on the schedule, and you would no longer call it a home game and an away game like we now do. We literally take a home game away from, the Jaguars, the Steelers, or whoever's playing in London, right? And you take an away game away, but that's not as bad for the away team. So there's that. That would be cool, but it really just sounds like they'll like kind of alternate, which sounds like a nightmare. So you would get and it would probably be an NFC AFC matchup. So the NFC gets the home games one year, and then the AFC gets the home games the other year. And I hate it. And I agree that the current system is elegant and useful and great and generally fair. This sucks. Like if you're in your window and you have to be the away game versus a team that can't even like take advantage of the home game, like that sucks, right? Like half the NFC is not going to be good. Like kind of just by the way math tends to work, and they're going to get the home game one year, and an AFC team is going to lose by like 1 point, and they're in the middle of their window, and that's going to be what kicks them out of the playoffs. Except, I guess the 7th seed results. That I don't know, but like that's annoying. I hate it.
Again, it is odd that it hasn't been kind of explained the way you would expect something like that to be fleshed out.
Yeah, what if we had a 7th game or a 17th game? That would be cool. Yeah. And that's like
I believe I may have answered one of this guy's questions before, but on the off chance I haven't, a Twitter user by the name of Professor Poop says that as the world's leading fecal microbiologist, I know a thing or two about poo, thus it is where my interest lies. Who are the poopiest draft prospects the Vikings should avoid? Any really good prospects, but smelly fits? You actually asked a question to the point where I needed to answer it needed to have it answered on the show. Congrats.
Wait, so do you have an answer?
No. I'm staying away from this and feel like it should just be flushed away.
What prospects basically that I just don't like? Well, I don't love Matt Hennessy, interior offensive line from Temple. I remember seeing him the Senior Bowl. Didn't like what he did. I think the center from Wisconsin, who if he had declared early would have been a really good prospect, Tyler Biadasz. I don't know how to pronounce his name. That would have been nice. Andrew Thomas, a first-round tackle, I think is just an awful fit. And so he might be a good player. He's an awful fit. The Vikings should avoid him. There's a potential trap player in Auburn's Prince Tega Wanogho, who is like super athletic, but is just like so raw that he could really like hurt you as a potential starting offensive lineman. LSU tackle Sadiq Charles is super up and down. Don't necessarily love him. Don't really like Matt Pert from UConn. So those are like the offensive linemen that are like that. Quarterback, I think Jordan Love, like I could be convinced to like him, but I don't. So he's the poopiest prospect the Vikings should avoid. So there's that. I guess at wide receiver, I haven't really studied the wide receivers all that much. I guess maybe I'd stay away from KJ Hamler, but I'm a little bit too averse to drops. It's just like a thing I think I care about more than it actually matters. But that's like a problem he has. Plus he gets out physical fairly easily. I might avoid most of these tight ends. I think they'll be overdrafted. They're not very good. But I really haven't like studied a ton of these prospects. Like I'm worried about the Iowa edge player because he doesn't seem like he has the athleticism to hang. I'm worried about Patrick Queen from LSU, at cornerback. I guess I'm a little bit worried about CJ Henderson, but most of these guys can just like play. So I'm not that concerned. I don't know. I just haven't done as much digging into this draft to find like the poopiest prospects. Yeah, I'll get back to you, Professor Poop.
We'll have more information on that after your trip to Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Next question is from Jacob Kost, who asks, fantastic news. The XFL is expanding to Minnesota. You get to decide what they're named, what city they play in, and what free agent coach you're bringing in to lead them to springtime glory. Who you got?
My coach is Mike Tice.
Interesting. Okay.
I mean, he's a good coach. Plus he's got Minnesota ties. Plus I think most people like him, right? Like, you know, he did really well for a second. Mm-hmm. So I would say Mike Tice. And it's just, I don't know, it's just like interesting. If it's Mike Tice. I would still put it in Minneapolis. I would just like alternate with the Vikings or whatever. What would you call it? It'd be kind of funny if they were the Lakers.
I like that.
Yeah. Like, so most of these XFL teams, the names have like just nothing to do with where they are. Like the AAF, like the names, they tried to make it like regional, right? Like the Arizona Hotshots were named after a local firefighting service. The Birmingham Iron are named after the fact that Birmingham is an iron producing city. The Memphis Express is named after the fact that like all the postal services are like set up in Tennessee. So like those are regional names, but like the XFL is like Seattle Dragons, you know, where there's like dragons, or like the LA Wildcats. We're a high school team in the Lake Conference. Like, whatever. Battlehawks is great. I don't think it's like there's like a regional associate, but that's a good name, Battlehawks. Renegades is cool. Houston Roughnecks, that has a local tie. So like there's some, but for the most part, there's none.
Yeah.
But I would like the Minnesota XFL team to have a local tie.
Well, how about this? I would go with Wade Phillips.
That's just like a good coach. That's just picking it. Like, that's not like fun.
Free agent coach. Hold on. Free agent coach, Wade Phillips. Let's go Duluth, because that way we can make the team name be the Superiors.
Okay, so I like that a lot. I'm not shocked because I saw it in the show notes, but I like it a lot. I don't know what the mascot is, but like...
We're just like better than you.
Mascot. Yeah, we're just better. That's very Minnesotan, too.
That is...
Although it tends to be kind of like a subtle, understated assumption that you're better. Mm-hmm. Like, anybody who's seen Amy Klobuchar in the debates, like, she's like pretty confident she's just better. But like, yeah, that's good. I said it in a tone where I was just like, it's fine. No, I like it. I like the idea of it being a little bit more concrete than that. So I like the Lakers. Again, Lakers, super funny name to me. Mm-hmm. Plus you get to reclaim it. That's our name. You can't have it. That's our word.
Really? You went there?
I'm just saying, it's our word. They took it. Like, literally, they took it.
This is your version of the furry blackface thing we talked about before we started recording, isn't it?
Yes.
Check out the Christmas show for that conversation.
Or I guess you could go, like, super local, call them, like, the Walleyes. If you wanted to be, like, as, like, goofy as, like, because the Golden Gophers, it's a super unique college name. No one else really has it. And it's like fairly like non-threatening. In the same vein, if they were like the Minnesota hot dish, like that's like goofy and non-threatening, but it doesn't have to be a threatening mascot.
But you can still choke on a hot dish.
Yeah, and the mascot could throw like tater tots, or if it's really mad, glass casserole.
We're having Dutch oven night at UCF. at TCF Bank Stadium, because we're playing outdoors because we're the Minnesota team. Jordan asks, I ragged on Packers fans for years because John Kuhn was average at best, and they only loved him because his name was fun to shout in a stadium. Then we got CJ Ham. Aside from being a Vikings fan, what did I do to anger the football gods?
You have to double down and argue that Ham is legitimately good.
Ham is legitimately good, and no one can defend him on Madden. Like it is hilarious because I'll be in a 3rd and 1, 4th and 1 situation on Madden, and for whatever reason, fullback draw is just too quick for their defense to be able to plug up the A gap. So I'm just able to slide in for
nothing to do with CJ Ham. It's just like a glitch.
No, CJ Ham. It makes this possible. In previous years, the fullback position for the Vikings has been useless at best in Madden. He is useful in Madden, therefore you do not have to feel bad about the situation.
Have you tried trading fullbacks in Madden just to see if maybe it's a Madden 20 thing specifically?
No, well, I have tried different fullbacks in that spot, and I have not had the success. CJ Ham does appear to be head and shoulders above the competition. When it comes to running up the gut for a 3rd and 1, fight me online, find me on Madden, and I will run CJ Ham 5 to 6 yards up the gut for no apparent reason.
All right.
Like you have.
Do you have a Madden handle? Are you on Xbox?
I'm not giving that out yet.
Okay.
I will lose horribly. I do, however, enjoy making 13-year-olds and 12-year-olds just like scream obscenities and rage quit. That really is that's my Super Bowl. Dusty asks, how many times can you use a towel before washing it?
It's like a trap question, because if you answer anything but once, someone's going to be disgusted, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, obviously, if you're like washing your hands a number of times, but I assume like after a shower.
If that thing hits the ground, I'm washing it.
How dirty is your bathroom?
That voids it for me, because it never feels like it gets as dry after it hits the floor.
Okay. I usually go with twice. I know that's gross to some people, but since I don't use my shower towel for like anything else, like drying my hands, it doesn't seem like that causes a problem for me. I like scrub in the shower, so it's not like I'm wiping anything onto the towel.
Well, yeah. I will. I tend to go somewhere a little longer. I usually go about 3 to 4. Usually more on the 4 side.
more on the 4 side, maybe 5, 6, 7.
If I was gonna be doing it like every other day, with the number of people living in my house and the number of people taking a shower on a weekly basis, like we would be doing nothing but shower. We would be doing nothing but towel laundry at that point.
We've got like a wild towel to human ratio in this house, like tons of towels. So it's very easy for me to be like,
we do not. That is not a luxury that is provided in our situation. So if we were going to do that for every time that in fact, we yell at the kids when they end up having a bunch of towels on the floor, like, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, do you realize how many towels we have in here? Come on.
Start
sounding like
hotel,
Job.
by the way, the answer is half.
Oh, yeah.
I like use like a towel. I'm halfway done. I'm like, well, done with that towel. Next towel. I just throw it on the ground.
Exactly.
It's like probably awful for the environment, but whatever. Give me better towels next time.
And make sure that your shower has a better water pressure capability than like a dog peeing on me. Like, give a little bit of pressure there. Kenneth Allen asks, what is the best Bon Appetit Gourmet Makes video?
For me, so if people don't watch Gourmet Makes on YouTube from Bon Appetit, do it. It's amazing. What are you doing? Why do you even have a computer? Computer, number 1, watch Gourmet Makes on YouTube. Number 2, like your job or whatever.
Number 3, Maddie Matheson's new show, which is turning into The Shining. It is astonishing.
It's wild.
I love that so much.
So there's so many good episodes for so many different reasons. Claire surviving another mental breakdown. And for people who are unfamiliar with the show, she takes like popular, almost like junk food items, like Pringles or Pop-Tarts or Butterfingers or whatever. The most recent one was Butterfingers. And then makes them at home, like a homemade version of it. But like it stretches like the levels of absurdity to call it homemade because they keep on having to either MacGyver equipment that just doesn't exist for a home, or like ordering like these crazy dehydrators that like your average home would not reasonably have. Like if you went through a wish list of the appliances that somebody wanted that they didn't have, like a dehydrator is probably not in your top 10 unless your kitchen is unusually stocked, right? And it's just like full of that kind of stuff. And they've like kind of begun to lean into it because it's just like, well, you can't make this food that's made in a factory without at least some equipment that mimics the unique qualities that like these factories produce, right? So like it is kind of funny, but like they make it at home and they're like, how do you do an M&M or whatever? How did Doritos work? Which by the way, that's my answer, Doritos. That episode I think is really great because they go into Dorito dust a lot. They talk about it and they make Dorito dust, which is like the most magical thing. Requires a lot of the use of that dehydrator.
I forget if they go in depth on just how flammable Doritos are that episode.
They do for a little bit, I think. I hope I'm not confusing it with like the Mentos Coke episode, which I don't think it was even Gourmet Makes. I think they just did it for Bon Appetit. And like, was it Gabby just didn't believe the Coke and Mentos thing, so they just went into the walk-in fridge and just did it, and it got Gabby in the face. It was great. Watch these videos; they're great.
I remember starting a fire in front of the kids with a bunch of Doritos, and they looked at me like I was some sort of a god. Like, no, this is just incredibly bad for you.
No, it's just like, think about how much oil is in these Doritos. That's why.
Yes.
Like the dried corn is fuel, and the oil is also fuel.
The fire here, yeah. For me, it was the M&Ms and the Kit Kats. I thought the Kit Kats was better, but the M&Ms featured the full-on breakdown.
I don't know if there was an episode more breakdowny than the M&Ms one, like that, and like that's kind of one of the, like the weird cool things about watching these videos. And if you go into, they've got a playlist. If you go to the playlist, the very first videos are like 11, 12 minutes, 18 minutes maybe that are long. And now they're like 40 minutes because they're just like going through the saga. Like it's not even about how to make Twinkies or whatever, which that was a good episode. That was a breakdown. Holy crap. But it's not like about how to make M&Ms or Twinkies, really. It's about like one person's struggle to survive when their only job is to find out how to make Twinkies, which is way better.
Speaking of the Bon Appetit series, or the Bon Appetit series of videos, I do enjoy Brad Leone's It's Alive. I think that's
It's Alive. Brad is just an insane amount of charisma.
Yeah, that is the perfect show for him. Really,
and the editing is so well done for him. Like it's just so goofy and irreverent, and it's perfect.
It matches his personality perfectly. The other series of videos I really like from Bon Appetit are from, I believe the guy's name is Chris, who reconstructs.
Chris Morocco.
Yeah, he reconstructs food without seeing it. Like he has a blindfold on, so he can smell it, he can touch it, he can taste it, but he cannot look at it. And so he will walk up to a plate and try to figure out, oh, this is Guy Fieri's garbage plate nachos, and it's several layers tall, and he has to figure out a million different items that go into it, how they cooked the meat, how they cooked the different sauces and everything, and it's just so good.
He's incredible. He's a super taster. Yeah. He's incredible at identifying ingredients. And it's funny, he'll get like tripped up on like something that's like kind of easy. But then he'll like nail what region of the world the cilantro came from. And you're like, what in the world? And then he nails the person who made it. Like he's blindfolded. He's like taking apart a taco with his hands. And you're like, that's weird. And he's like evaluating each ingredient individually with his like fingers. And he's like, yeah, I think this is a steak covered in like crema, and the crema is made of sniff. And then he lists all 8 ingredients. Oh, yeah, I know who made this. Like, what? What?
And he'll add one completely out of nowhere, but like it makes sense in the dish. You're like, oh man. And then he just, it's truly fantastic stuff. And you really feel like you're rooting for him by the end of it. Like, God, it's skirt steak. Quit trying to put pork belly in those.
Red Leicester. I forgot it was Red Leicester. Mm-hmm. He like never like 100% nails it, which just tells you how difficult of a task it is. But what he does is so phenomenal.
He did really well at the one before this last one. I think he ended up getting like an 89 or a 90%.
He killed the last one too. No spoilers.
That was pretty good. Adam Bryan says, if you can't tell, we're on the food section of today's mailbag. Adam Bryan says, I've been on a bacon, egg, and cheese kick since watching the glorious food porn in Birds of Prey. What's the best way to cook eggs for a BEC? Fried, scrambled, another style? And what is the best bread vehicle for said BEC?
Well, I think the questions are related, right? Like if you have like a soft bagel, I think that like an egg patty, or maybe just a soft fried egg is good. If you've got like a soft bread, I think a fried egg is great because you want the yolk to interact with it. But I think like if it's a wrap, you definitely want scrambled. I think that if it's like a biscuit, you definitely want more of like an egg patty that's kind of in the style that you get at a fast food place, but like, you make it at home so it tastes 8 million times better. So I think that the style of egg is really dependent on that vehicle. And I think the softer the bread and the more kind of space the bread occupies, the more you want like a runny yolk. But in the other direction, I think you want like a harder yolk or a gelatinous yolk or a scrambled egg. Honestly, like I've had bacon, egg, and cheese sandwiches where the egg was hard boiled. And that's like really good. So I think it depends on the bread.
I kind of prefer it in a bit of like a folded form, trying to make it kind of compact, but that's just kind of been me and putting it on a biscuit. But there's plenty of good ways to do it. I have not seen Birds of Prey, so I'm not privy to all of the ways they were eating it in the movie. I've
not yet seen Birds of Prey either. I think my preferred method is a a super flaky biscuit, not necessarily a Southern biscuit, but one with like tons of layers.
I kind of prefer it in, and I'm not saying that this ends up being the end all be all, but the way that they kind of fold the sandwich for the Hardee's breakfast sandwich, and I don't know if you've ever had that, but for the loaded omelet style thing, like the way they end up kind of folding it into an actual like square or rectangle ends up. I like that form of delivery anyway. Justin Ekstrom asks, why am I even answering this? Would you rather watch an XFL game or a fourth NFL preseason game? XFL, and it's not even close.
Not close. Not absolutely an XFL game. Way more fun.
The final question for today's show is from HVAC Repairman, who asks, what was your worst date like?
I don't have a story, so I'm just gonna, like, I've had bad dates, but they're all just like, yeah, we had nothing to talk about, so we just had to, like, sit and eat for 30 minutes. It's not an interesting story. You have a story.
I suppose I do have a story. This would have been the early aughts, the early 2000s. Yeah, let's go with that. I was set up by well-meaning people. Well-meaning friends. We had a few mutual friends. We agreed to meet and talk. I think I'd met her a couple of times before. Sure. So we agreed to go on a date. We went out to the Green Mill, Grand Forks, back before it burned down the first time. And we settled down to eat. We got a bottle of wine at the table, and we put in our orders, and we proceeded to sit and wait to get food. And things at that point were going fairly well, I suppose. Nothing was being hurled at each other, and things seemed pretty civil. But for whatever reason, I couldn't get out of her what she did for work. And I came to realize at that moment that none of my friends knew what she did for work either. So I wouldn't say I harped on it, because of course I'm me and I'm telling the story and I want you to sympathize with me at this point. So I wouldn't say I harped on her about it, but I was curious as to what could be the thing that you're not talking about.
So was she like reticent to tell you? Like, she was like, I don't know if I want to tell you.
She was being a bit evasive. It was the first couple times, or the first 2 or 3 times, it was kind of one of those, well, I do a lot of things. What do you do for a living? Just a quick diversion.
Classic.
And I had my ADD.
My way.
Exactly. I'd had my ADD meds that day, so we're going to go straight in on this and try to figure out what the hell is going on. Well, eventually she told me what she did for a living. And she proceeded to explain. Now, keep in mind, this is in the early days of the internet. This is the very, very early 2000s. So when I say what I'm about to say, this was incredibly uncommon compared to now, where you can at least think this is somewhat more common. She proceeded to tell me that she was a foot porn model. And she went on cameras, or she went on like MSN Messenger, and people paid her money to stomp on things and to, like, chips or whatever, and put lotion on her feet for people.
So like, the foot wouldn't interact. This is such like a weird medical conversation. The foot wouldn't interact with like other sexual objects. It would just be like, yeah, step on that water bottle for me.
Yep.
Make it crinkle.
Yep.
Or whatever.
100%.
Okay. That's got to be, again, so if you're not exposed, if you're not extremely online, like everybody is now,
in the early
2000s, yeah, that would be bizarre, right? Like, you tell me that now, and I'm just like, yeah, there's people who do that. That makes sense.
Yeah, I tell you this in 2002, and you'd be like, I'm sorry, what?
World? What is it? Why did we invent the internet? Well, precisely for this, it turns out.
Yeah, as it turns out, this being a delivery system turned out
I like that.
Really
I like that you're like, yeah, she had to do it over MSN Messenger. Like, now we've got like these feature-filled platforms that like she could like choose her delivery platform of choice and weigh the pros and cons and be like, well, this delivers videos a la carte, this one's subscription or whatever, right?
Yep.
This one allows me to like message fans directly.
Nope.
This is Patreon. I could just do it behind a pay. Like, no,
she was in a situation of choosing between like MSN and ICQ, like Yahoo Messenger. Yeah.
She doesn't get to like put her like unique boutique website in her Twitter bio or whatever.
Precisely.
It's just a
buy my worn boots. Nope, nothing like that. It existed purely in this situation. So,
did you ask like about details? Because my first question is based off of my knowledge of how the internet has evolved into 2020, right? And so, like, I have no idea. Were webcams super inefficient? Did she just sell photos, or was she able to like do was the internet fast enough for her to like do videos over MSN? Did MSN even let you do videos?
Yes, it did.
Yes.
All right, so let's continue the story.
Okay.
Because I had 1,000 questions.
Oh, no way.
And all of a sudden, she decided she didn't want to talk about work anymore. So,
weird.
But amongst the discussions were like, how does that like work financially? It's just through PayPal and everything, and people just send it in that way. I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
Thanks, Elon.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Follow-up question. Webcams, or is this recorded after? It's like, there's situations where we can kind of record the sessions, or we can just I can just use the webcam and it ends up streaming through MSN and it ends up working that way. I'm like, wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, you definitely asked too many questions. There's no question about that.
Well, okay, but here's where the problem started.
Okay. We haven't encountered the problem yet. That's exciting.
The real problem is I started to make foot puns after this because
you were like everybody after the Rex Ryan stuff came out.
Yeah.
You were like Wes Welker.
Yes. And so I just started making foot puns left and right, and she wasn't having it. And
really? She can't have... Well, maybe she's just heard it too many times, but I just feel like... Can't have a sense of humor.
Apparently, if you poke fun at it long enough, it starts to tickle. So you... Terrible dad joke. I don't care. It landed. It was fine. So I make too many foot puns to the point where she actually says, "Can you please stop making foot jokes?" And
she probably thought you were like disrespecting her profession. That was probably...
I may have been. I may not have been. I was 20-ish, 21 at the time. There's a chance I was.
Knowing what you're like now, you must have been insufferable at 20.
Yeah, I wasn't making positive life choices in Green Mills in the early aughts. I can tell you that much. Sorry, my second worst date just popped into my head. She was a big Jameis Winston fan. That should have told me more than I needed to know. But so back to this situation. I said, fine. Nope. Totally fine. And so the waiter comes by and asks to refill, if we needed another refill for wine. And she said yes. And he comes back to fill it, and I made some comment just as an aside, not even thinking I was doing it. Like, all right, the dinner is afoot. The game is afoot. And she proceeded to throw the entire glass of wine, like just holding onto the glass, but throwing it, and the entirety of that full glass just ended up all over me. Head to toe. She got up.
Oh my, come on.
She got up.
Oh my God.
Put her coat on and went right to the door and left.
Stomped away, you say?
Yes. Well, not stomped. You don't want to. It's kind of like the thing in Bull Durham where when you're in a bar fight, you don't punch with your pitching hand. Like, you don't want to hurt.
Yeah, you should have said it's like Zoolander the hand model.
Well, that too, but I've seen Bull Durham more recently. So she left. The waiter who saw the whole thing came back with a towel and I just slowly just started dabbing my hair or whatever, and I was like, no cop is gonna believe the whole "I've had one drink tonight" as I'm driving home smelling like this.
I've seen this before, sir. Let me get the wine towel.
Yeah, exactly. Let me proceed to get the wine towel for this. And I got my, it's like, okay, well, her order's just about done. It's like, no, box that up.
She's not coming back.
I came home with my food and her food. I remember throwing the box at my roommate at the time. When, you want this? My date didn't go well. I was like, this is a full order of Desert Fire pasta. I was like, yeah, it didn't go well.
Yeah, it happened to not go well very quickly.
What's great is a couple years later, I ran into her with a few mutual friends, and she and I were joking about that. And she proceeded to order a glass of wine wherever we were at. And the entire time I was just like trying to dodge it, trying to like have somebody in front of, like between us the whole time. And I made some comment. It's like, yeah, you left right before the food came. It's like, I was really hungry that night and so upset I didn't get to eat it. It's like, yeah, damn shame. Let me tell you, it was delicious.
I mean, you paid for all of it, right? Like this.
Yep.
There's nothing she can say about this.
If anything, I am a gentleman, or was. That particular time.
I wouldn't maybe go that far. I mean, you did deserve to have that wine in your face.
I did make one too many foot puns to the person who clearly wanted to talk about anything else but that. Fine. My bad. Me in my 20s. Clearly should have found something else to talk about over dinner. But quite frankly, the TV wasn't good. It was Green Mill Foods, so it was okay. The bread that was coming out was good, but not worth talking about. But her work was unique enough to just distract me the whole time.
You didn't come into the date with any like pre-planned subjects to talk about?
I'm pretty good on my feet. I can usually figure something out like that. Every other situation that's worked well for me, that particular night, I got tripped up. I
wish I had a glass of wine right now.
Yeah, well, you don't. Arif, what do you have to plug?
Yeah, I've got some pieces at The Athletic. XFL standouts. I publish that every week. Also, we've done a roster review series, me and Chad. All of the position groups have been reviewed. There's also going to be kind of like just a whole general roster review after all of that. So what does the roster look like at quarterback, offensive line, defensive back, etc., with a projection for 2020, what it looks like and the grade I essentially gave the roster based on its outlook. And then also I'll be at the Combine. So after position groups perform like the various drills, like the short drill. I mean, you know what the drills are. I'll identify which players kind of fit the Vikings based off of an athleticism filter, and so I'll identify those. So that's what I have to plug. You can find me on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. You probably already know that. We will be back in just a little bit of time. Arif is going to come back from Indianapolis and decompress for a bit. Hopefully not throw any wine at anyone. Please do not make foot puns at Arif Hassan. He will react accordingly. That is going to be it for this episode. So once again, thank you guys for listening. If you enjoy the show and would like to contribute, you can do so at patreon.com/NorseCode or paypal.me/NorseCode as well. For Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember to bring the wine towel. And we will see you in about 2 weeks. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.